And so instead of wearing out all these detachments running all over South Carolina, Watson, I think's plan was just to go somewhere where he had a good clear field of fire, set up, and wait on Marion to come get him. So, and we'll see that he actually does that. After crossing Mount Hope Swamp, he could have continued on toward just up, down the river road, paralleling the north side of the Savannah River, or he could have turned north to threaten King Street. And that's what he did. Now, did Marion wait till he turned, or did Marion already anticipate that and have men gathering at the bridges across the Black River between where they were and where King Street was? I don't know. But the reason that I spent all that time on that organization chart and talking to you about Marion's brigade, remember, it was never a block of men at one place at one time. It's really a bunch of couriers going out to Cheraw, going out to Kingston, going to around Georgetown up as far as Cannon and saying, hey, you know, we got this going on. Will you meet us here? Will you meet us there? Will you meet? So he's got men coming in. But in any event, Watson turns north and heads toward Lower Bridge. Lower Bridge is still there today, and Lower Bridge is an interesting place. It's near Salters, South Carolina, on the road south out of King Street. So when Watson gets to the Lower Bridge, Watson has got the higher ground. And in military terms, having the higher ground is usually desirable. It was interesting listening to the question of why, if the British had the higher ground at Kings Mountain, they didn't win. Here's another example of having the higher ground is already good. The difference in elevation between the south side of Great Bridge and the north side, where the floodplain is probably around 30 feet. Now, I haven't measured it, but it's something like that. So we're not talking about a mountain, but we are talking about a pretty high ground. The river, the Black River, has curved into it and sort of carved, not a vertical escarpment, but a fairly sharp cliff there. For the cannon to be effective, Watson had to bring the cannon up to the edge to depress it to fire at the men down in the swamp below. To get the cannon up to the edge exposed the men that were manhandling that cannon to rifle fire. Because down below in the floodplain is full of trees and bushes and stuff and good places for patriots to hide and use their rifles. They also have protection from cavalry because the cavalry can't ride down the creek and across the river as the river's too deep there and the escarpment is a little too high to be routed by cavalry. And also musketeers would probably be out of range. So there are not a lot of setups in the Southern campaign where the rifle is the superior weapon, but at this time, where you're trying to shoot these cannons down this escarpment to get people down in the floodplain amongst the trees, the rifleman could pick them off. Now, even a 3-pound cannon is unyielding enough and heavy enough to need 6 to 10 men to manhandle it around. When you're going from bridge to bridge, 10 miles or so, you put the end of the carriage on a caisson, so it's got 4 wheels, you hook it up to 2 draft horses and you move it that way. But when you put it on a battlefield, you unlimber it, you take it off the caisson, the tail end's sitting on the ground, and to aim that boy and to pull it back, to service it, to reload it, it takes manpower to do that. And they have men that are assigned to that. And so those same men that have to physically move it up and aim it and depress it and look down the barrel at which way it's pointed and doing that kind of thing, all can be picked off by a good rifleman. And McCottry's riflemen happened to be down at the bottom on the other side of that river, protected from British bayonet charge, protected from the saber of the cavalryman. And so that stopped Watson cold at Great Bridge and stopped them from getting into King Street. Now, one of the typical things that you do where you have a crossing, you want a force, is you put a force there to quote unquote entertain the guys on the other side. And while you're entertaining them, You take a flanking force, you send them upriver or downstream, you find a crossing, and you come up behind them. That happened at Patterson's Bridge on the Columbia River, the Saltcatcher River in 1780. Classic maneuver. Everybody in Infantry School 101 knew that tactic. And of course, that's what Watson tried. But thankfully, some member of the defense squad, we don't know if it was Marion himself or McCautry or Ory or who did it, but they anticipated the fords that might be tried to flank, and they had them covered. Somebody here talked about a crossing, infantry crossing open water. They had them, so they stopped the British from that. So Watson, for whatever reason, decides to back up and regroup. So there's a picture of the Black River. Now the Black River there looks like a huge, ferocious, and deep river. And I suspect when it rained 12 inches around here, or 15 inches 2 weeks ago, it was a huge, ferocious river. But on most days, I suspect you could walk across it pretty easy. And it's not that far. So Watson goes back and goes to Witherspoon's plantation. And he starts there. This campaign of where they're talking, where Marion and Watson start talking to each other through letters. And like I say, this is the most prolific period of letter writing. So evidently somewhere along the way, Marion got himself a nice stack of paper and some goose quills and some ink so that he could go at it with his British counterpart. They stayed at Witherspoon's about 2 days. I think there's 2 different locations that are pretty close to Cooper's Country Store, if you know where that is, on 521. Definitely recommend you stop in there. And that was the area, either right around there, whether it's east or west. There's 2 different locations I've seen. Don't really know exactly where the actual house was, but we know he didn't stay there long. And my guess, the reason he didn't stay there long was the size of the field of fire. All of these weapons, you got to be able to see your enemy. And so if you have a farmhouse and with barns and stuff around it, but the trees are pretty close, then that favors Marion's men to be able to sneak up in the night, get behind a tree, and take a pot shot at somebody going to deliver a message to the outside or something like that. And so I think that then he moved to Blakely's plantation. Once again, there's several different possible choices on where Blakely's is, and I don't want to get in today on me telling you exactly where it was, because I exactly don't know. But the reason for the move appears to me to be to have a house in the middle of some pretty good sized fields so you can see somebody coming up on you, and so that you have the cannon so you can shoot further than anybody else, and so that you can, target those people coming up on you. And there he sits for a week. And this war of words that include both Watson and Francis Marion, but also Nisbet Balfour, who's the commandant in Charleston, all have to do with who's playing fairly, who's playing by the rules of war. And it's a kind of a bizarre exchange to me. Marion would write, I don't know what you're talking about. I wouldn't do anything the British soldiers don't do to our people, burning houses or something. Evidently it's okay. So you have this amazing war of words. One of the things that Watson asked Marion for is a pass for Lieutenant Tarantino. Or I don't know if it's misspelled or I'm remembering it wrong.
That's right. That's right.
Is that right? Toriano. And Lieutenant Toriano is obviously not from around here. Probably in that I'm just kidding, John. Anyway, he gets picked off by one of Marion's sharpshooters and has a right nasty wound. And Watson wants to get him to medical help in Charleston. Marion allows for the pass between the lieutenant and 6 men, but says which route they have to go on to use this free pass to get back to Charleston. Now, I was trying to think when I was putting actually all these slides are mainly Dave's. Why would you engage in all this inane name calling like you're in the 7th grade or something like that. I mean, they already picked a fight for each other. They'll all both kill each other. They've all killed each other's people, so why do this war of words? And the only reason that I can think of is that every time you send a letter to Francis Marion, you get to send someone out under a flag of truce that has some chance of figuring out where Marion is. Because if Marion himself is a target, if you could figure out where he is, then you got 500 troops. You can go get him. And so the custom was, as the guy rides out with the white flag and says, hey, we want to parley, they take whoever's got the flag, they blindfold him, they ride him around in circles for a while, and then they take him to Marion, who is standing right there the whole time. That's the way he did it. That's pretty effective. But my guess is the reason they wasted all this paper was really not to document things to befuddle historians and to entertain after-dinner groups, but was really to try to figure out what Marion's composition is, where his men were posted, and whether or not they appeared to be getting ready to attack, or they're just happy to sit there. Because once again, I think the new anti-partisan plan is put some honey out there and see if the fly will come to you and swat it, instead of going running around the countryside and looking for it. So all of this is going on right in this neck of the woods. This is called Ox Swamp, not to be confused with the Ox Swamp that runs on the other side of Manning. Same name, different swamp. And this Ox Swamp, there's several different locations of Blakeney's all around this, so I'm not sure which Blakeney house he was in. But in any event, after sitting there for a week and giving Marion's marksmen a chance occasionally to take a pot shot, Watson initially takes off to the east on the road, the river road that parallels the Black River, the lower bridge there. Marion's men have covered the bridge and they have destroyed the bridge. So while I'm sure that Watson could have easily forced a crossing there, or he may have been just doing a feint, he takes off to the south and comes down here to the road that parallels the Santee River. And he's headed toward Lanude's Ferry. Now, Lanude's Ferry is one of the two main drags if you wanted to go to Charleston. So I suspect that he wanted to give himself the option play of heading into Charleston if it became necessary, or he's trying to fool Marion into thinking that he's headed for Charleston, which he wasn't doing at all. It appears that a detachment by Ory was sent out around this way to try to get in front of Watson. And of course, Ory's mounted men with probably no supplies, no cannons, no wagons, and no baggage, could ride pretty fast and get in front of him. And Ory, in fact, did get in front of him. And probably their first purpose was to just figure out where's he going so we can mount some sort of an operation. George? This is an example, and I won't read to you because I think everybody here can probably read, of some of the words that they exchanged. And it just, the letters, the proliferation of letters, just doesn't seem to justify the effort to me except to spy on the other side. And it's probable that Marion was taking advantage of the same opportunity, because every time Marion answered a letter, one of Marion's men got to go to Blakeney's plantation and count the number of British and see where the cannons were, and see how many officers are there, and look and see if they're eating their horses yet, or if they're eating high on the hog, and make a pretty good intelligence assessment. Okay, there's more of a war of words. Like I say, every day they're writing once or twice a day. Okay, George. It looks like Watson went near Lanude's Ferry and then continued east. Instead of crossing the Santee at Lanude's and going toward Charleston, he turned and went toward Georgetown. Spent the night at Chauvin's plantation, which we have a pretty good idea where that is. And then you have Marion's scouts killed a slave attempting to deliver a letter. And the contents of the letter, as I understand it, had just to do with kind of alerting the garrison at Georgetown as, hey, we're coming your way. But he had already made the turn to come that way, so getting the letter that said that didn't really accomplish anything. By that time, Marion has amassed a pretty good concentrated force and fallen in behind the British and are following them from Lanude's Ferry toward Georgetown. Okay, George. The next choke point, if you will, is the headwaters of the Symp River. For those of y'all from Georgetown, you know where that is, where the great curve is in 521. The loop that forms the inner harbor at Georgetown next to Front Street, beautiful place, is a loop in the Symp River. The Symp River is one of these short tidal rivers like the Ashley and the Cooper that go inland 20 miles or so and then peter out. The headwaters of the Symp River is a big creek that is fairly easily bridged in the 18th century. What happens is that Peter Ory gets to the Georgetown side of the river before the British get there. Next one. So this is kind of my guess of how that came down. These roads, these are the 18th century roads that are still appear to me to be exactly in the same place. This is 521 coming out of Georgetown, and there's the Great Bend in it right there. The headwaters of the Symp River right there. It's not hardly a big river at all, it's just a big creek. So you got Marion following Watson, who's coming along this road to the northeast. Watson gets to this point. Riflemen have been deployed here. Ory's dragoons are backing up the riflemen. And the idea was for these riflemen to fire into the British and stop them there. Here you have Marion's main army come from behind. They were close enough for Watson surely to have known that they were back behind them. And so Watson immediately knows, you know, I've got Marion's army behind me here. I'm pushed up against this creek. This is a bad place for me to stop and have a fight, because remember, the whole idea was for Watson to pick his ground and let Marion come to him. So Watson divides